Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is John Rutledge, the second Chief Justice of the United States of America. Now, let's back up a little bit. John Rutledge came from a pretty wealthy family in South Carolina, though certainly not the planter elite. His father also dies when he's fairly young, but either way, Rutledge is able to make his way to Europe to study law. He returns to South Carolina, and now he's a lawyer, and he's an astonishingly good one. Makes quite a name for himself, where at just 26 years old, South Carolina sends him to New York City as a delegate to the 1765 Stamp Act Congress. He's one of the youngest people at the Stamp Act Congress, and his time there is really important for several reasons. First of all, the Stamp Act Congress is an important step toward the American Revolution, but for Rutledge, he makes a lot of connections with other future founders he would need to work with later on in all of their careers. Now, 9 years go by after the Stamp Act Congress, and Rutledge is sent back to meet with some other founders. This time he's sent to Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. And while he's at the First Continental Congress, John Rutledge signs the Continental Association that institutes the boycott on British goods. Still not satisfied, Rutledge goes back to the Second Continental Congress the following year, and he's there for about a year, working hard when he's recalled by South Carolina. Now, he didn't do anything wrong. Quite the opposite. John Rutledge had been chosen as president of South Carolina. To be fair, what happens here is independence had not been declared yet, but South Carolina rather, decides, well, a war is going on and the royal governor's run away, so we should probably write a constitution just in case. And they do this, and they choose, in absentia, John Rutledge to come take over as president, and he does. He leaves in March of 76, just before independence. Don't worry, he's replaced by his younger brother, Edward, who does sign the Declaration of Independence for the two of them, we'll presume. When independence is declared, South Carolina kind of moves back to its original government. So although he's the first post-revolutionary, post-independence governor of South Carolina, he's still considered the 31st governor of South Carolina. I know it's a little difficult there's a lot of back and forth there, but for our purposes, really the first governor of South Carolina. Now, Rutledge would be governor of South Carolina with the exception of 1 year, every year from 1776 until 1782, pretty much the entirety of the Revolutionary War. And he focuses most of his efforts on the war, specifically on the militia within the state that were under his control as the executive of that state. He does a good job with the first siege of Charleston, but it doesn't work out so well for the second siege of Charleston. Now, either way, the war is won, and after he has finished being a longtime governor of South Carolina, Rutledge is then sent back to the Continental Congress for a bit, and afterwards he is actually chosen as a member of the state's Court of Chancery. The Court of Chancery is similar to a Supreme Court for the state of South Carolina. So at this point, he's had a lot of legal experience from the executive branch to the courtroom to the Continental Congress to essentially a Supreme Court. And that's why in 1787, John Rutledge is then chosen to attend the Constitutional Convention. Yeah, this guy's important. He goes to the Constitutional Convention and he attends every single session, which very few people can say. Probably his most notable part there is he does play a substantial role in the debates. He speaks up. At this point, he's still only in his mid-40s, so still a pretty young man despite all the years we've discussed. At the Constitutional Convention, he plays big parts in the debates on the executive, appropriation bills, and property ownership. Additionally, he is in charge of the Committee of Detail. He's chairman of the Committee of Detail. And this is fascinating because Committee of Detail was responsible throughout the summer of 1787 of updating the decisions being made. So when a new decision was made on what we should do with the Constitution, his committee would add it. Real quick, right? Well, the thing is, when they first wrote out the structure of the Constitution for these quick updates, Rutledge just kind of included a bunch of standard parliamentary procedures that were so standard, Congress never really debated them. They just were accepted as being part of it. Therefore, there are certain things that Rutledge kind of threw in there early in the summer that find their way into the language of the finalized Constitution. Again, these are so minor that they didn't even vote on it, and they voted on almost everything. So we don't want to get too carried away with his role there, but suffice to say, he was an important member of the Constitutional Convention. You might know the Constitution was ratified and the United States did become a federal government, after which George Washington became president and he nominated some justices for the Supreme Court. And John Rutledge is chosen as one of the inaugural members of the United States Supreme Court, taking office the same day as the first Chief Justice, John Jay. Now, Rutledge would actually leave the position after about a year and a half, but after not working for the federal government, John Jay ends up resigning as Chief Justice, and George Washington needs someone to step up. And George Washington, as President of the United States, appoints John Rutledge as acting interim Chief Justice of the United States. And that is why he's considered the second Chief Justice of the United States. But you may have noticed the title of this article, this video rather, is a little bit of clickbait, because John Rutledge is then sent to Congress to be approved as a justice, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, it's about this time the Jay Treaty is ratified, and John Rutledge stands up there and gives a speech talking trash about his predecessor as Chief Justice John Jay and saying some rather harsh words for George Washington. And while this was a point in Washington's career where people were starting to publicly talk more poorly about him than usually they had in the past, well, Congress was mostly run by Federalists, and it was not many of them were happy that John Rutledge had made these statements, and it appeared that he would not be accepted as the permanent Chief Justice of the United States. Now, unfortunately, John Rutledge, for reasons we cannot know, decides that this was just too big a mistake, that he had insulted his own career. This was his moment. He was going to be Chief Justice, the #1 judge in the country, and he blew it. So Rutledge decides to jump off a dock in South Carolina and kill himself. Fortunately, there are 2 slaves passing by, not his slaves, random slaves, who see him jump in the water and say, "Oh no, someone jumped in the water. Let's go help them." And they jump in and save Rutledge's life. This is fortunate, but it was certainly not enough to save his career. And with everything in shambles, he returns to private life, where he lives just 5 more years before passing away in his early 60s, 61 years old. It's kind of a sad ending to one of the most important American founders. It is hard to underestimate John Rutledge's, from the Stamp Act Congress to First Continental to Second Continental to Constitutional Convention to the first presidential administration on the Supreme Court. John Rutledge is inarguably South Carolina's most important founder. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it got a little dark at the end there. If you did, hit like. It helps other people learn about the channel, and we can learn about the American Revolution together. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. I put out videos like this 7 days a week, though they're usually a little shorter, but Johnny Rutledge gets a little extra time. Also, if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon page. There's a link for that in the description below, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.